All. My name's Ross Tedder. Thank you for joining us here tonight on the One Hood Power Hour. We have another candidate forum tonight, this time for Common Pleas. So tonight joining us, we have Mr. Anthony DeLuca, who we're super excited to have with us tonight. Before we get started, though, just want to remind everyone, Election Day is coming up in T-minus 5 weeks. May 16th is the Election Day itself. The last day for mail-in ballots to be requested, or absentee ballots to be requested, is going to be on May 9th. And the date that's also important after that, the last day registered to vote is going to be May 1st. So in order, May 1st, last day to register to vote. May 9th, last day to request a mail-in ballot. And May 16th is the day of the election itself. So that is the final time to vote. As we can see across the country right now, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. Eyes on you, Tennessee. There's a lot of stuff locally, right? While it may not be much of a spectacle, is just as important, And to be quite frank, we have a couple statewide seats up this year on the courts, right? Pennsylvania is only one or two, judges or representatives away from being Tennessee. So super important that we all come out and vote. Ton of positions up this year, both countywide and statewide. So please be tapped in. But moving on to tonight, like I said, we're very grateful to have Mr. Anthony DeLuca, and I'm just going to read from his bio super quick. Let's see. Helping people in the courts is what Mr. DeLuca describes as his passion. Following fearlessness and mental flexibility. As a criminal defense attorney who was involved with implementing and developing mental health court, his passion is helping people in the courts with mental health issues and addiction struggles. He runs a successful law practice in which he's tried hundreds of cases. Additionally, he does free legal work for the Homeless Children's Education Fund. He describes himself as the type of person who accomplishes his goals. And as a judge, he states that his goal would be to alter the treatment programs in our courts to make them both more effective and also to create more programs to assist those who are in need in the court. He states that he's committed to judicial equity, and as a union labor attorney representing working families and my fellow lawyers have awarded him their highest ranking. I apologize, I'm kind of stumbling over my words here. He was overwhelmingly endorsed by the vote of many of the unions of the Labor Council. Currently, he states he would be the only former union lawyer on the court. He's a husband and a father of 3 wonderful children, and with them, some days it feels like he's still dodging his way through Spain, which for context, I kind of skipped that part in the beginning of the bio, but he said that his career reminds him of the time that he ran with the Bulls in Spain, which that's pretty badass. I don't know if there's too many candidates we've had on the show that have run with the Bulls in Spain. But with that, we want to bring on our candidate. And Anthony, I just want to thank you again for joining us tonight. But starting off, let's just tell folks, why you're running and what brought you here tonight.
Yeah, Ross. Hey, let me tell you first of all, again, Anthony DeLuca, and I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored to have an opportunity to speak to your fine organization. I've been following you guys for a long time, and it's great to finally be here in front of you and have the opportunity to speak. So thank you so much, and I will tell you a little bit about me. So I'm Anthony DeLuca. I'm running for Judge of Court of Common Pleas. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Court of Common Pleas is our traditional trial court here in Allegheny County. So this is your TV or movie judge that you think of, right? So, there's a jury, sitting in the jury box. There's 2 lawyers screaming at each other. The judge is screaming and banging the gavel. That's what we're talking about. Now, of course, what we're dealing with is the real lives of people and their struggles. So it's not a movie or a TV show, but that's the type of court we're dealing with. And I'm very proud to be seeking that position. I believe it's a position that should be sought after you have great experience, not only with the law and knowledge of the law, but more importantly with the people who come before the court and understanding, their motivations, their needs, what interests are served in the court, as well as, how the decisions a judge makes ultimately affect not just the people in front of them, but their families and their communities and their friends. I think that's very important. And I think you cannot get particularly to those issues of understanding communities and people without having a lot of experience. And I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and I've built my career on dealing and helping individuals in the courts. I've worked with everybody who would come before me as a judge, and I've seen the tears and I've seen the struggles, and I think that puts me in the best position as a candidate and ultimately a judge to use that discretion given to a judge to make proper decisions about what's in front of us. And so, a little bit about me. I sort of grew up as a lower middle class kid. Was fortunate to be able to get off to college and ultimately to law school and University of Pittsburgh. I was telling Ross before the program started, I had an opportunity. I was fortunate I did very well in law school, and I had an opportunity to work with some very large corporate firms. And in that process, the money, to tell you the truth, was overwhelmingly large. I mean, the amount of money that they offered me was to me, to a kid the way I grew up, was staggering. And I ultimately, though, took a look at those jobs and I said two things. One, they didn't naturally fit my values and my belief system, which is I became a lawyer to help people, and I was only working for corporations if I did that job. And two, it was boring, to tell you the truth. It wasn't the type of work I wanted to do. So I turned down those type of jobs. I went and I worked for some courts. I worked for a Pennsylvania Supreme Court justice as well as a judge of the Superior Court, where we basically did the legal review of what the court accounting for did. So we'd draft opinions and do a lot of writing and so forth in those courts. From there, I went into public service, and it was there, and we'll touch more upon this as the questions continue. But I was there, and I was very proud to be part of a very small team that implemented and developed mental health court here in Allegheny County. And after that, after working there, I ultimately went on to become a criminal defense attorney primarily. I built a practice on being a criminal defense attorney. I'm very proud of the work I did. I see the struggles for families, not only who are convicted, but for those who are imprisoned prior to trial. How that affects them and their families. I've seen the just the impact on employment and school and all the things young people, generally young people, right? Young people are doing when they are when they are young and preparing for life, and even being charged can totally disrupt that process. So it's important to understand all of those things as we go forward. Briefly, we'll touch upon. I do a lot of free work, pro bono work for individuals' with mental health struggles in the criminal justice system. That's a passion of mine. There's an unbelievable amount of people in that situation who touch the criminal justice system and our society in general. And helping people with addiction and so forth too. And then I also, as Ross mentioned, I also there's a homeless children's education fund, which you'd be surprised at how many children are experiencing homelessness in our region. And the mission of that organization is to keep them connected to their educational opportunities while they're experiencing homelessness, and to help them get out of that situation as well. But what I do is I've had an opportunity to sort of build a triage system where they call me if any of the folks in their system have legal troubles, not just criminal justice, but civil. Even people who have recently graduated from the program are getting up on their feet. And if I can do the work, I do it. If not, I have some other lawyers that will take some of the work and provide them with those services. So I'm very proud of that as well. And then finally, as Ross said, I'm also a union labor lawyer. So if I would tell you the two things I'm a criminal defense attorney and a union labor lawyer. And I'm very proud with that. I work with working families and see how the legal system affects them. And I do that every day. And I fight for higher wages, which affects everybody's wages, better health care, all of the things that all of us as progressive Democrats would like to achieve for everybody. I'm able to fight for through my unions for individuals, which also affects the larger society. And I'm very proud of that. And I'd like to say this: we live in Western Pennsylvania, where the union movement is famous, and we have 43 judges on the court I'm seeking, 43 judges on the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, and there is not one former union labor attorney on that court. There are many, many, many former management labor attorneys. And I say it's time to correct that, and I'd like to be that person. So hope I haven't been too long-winded with you there, Ross, but that's sort of an introduction to me and my career.
Yeah, no, definitely not too long-winded, and thank you for answering the question in such great detail.
Uh,
Um, so you sort of just gave us an introduction to who you are, to who what experiences that have kind of shaped you. Um, I guess my next question is sort of like, going back to those experiences. You've mentioned that it gives you sort of like a unique perspective amongst, folks vying for the position. I guess, yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about like, um, about that perspective? You know what I mean? Like how your experience is working with, and your particular part of the legal system, influenced you to have the goals that you do.
yeah, so the goal obviously is to become a judge of the Court of Common Pleas. And why do I have that goal? Well, the reason I have that goal is that um, you know, I I have looked at the system for a very long time, and I had an opportunity to help change one small segment of it, and that's the mental health court. Um, I'm very proud to say, that I'm a person who gets things done and gets things built. Okay. And my passion is for criminal justice reform in the system, and primarily based upon my experience, in particular areas, which would be reform courts, right? Helping people get better. Um, and I feel that there's only so much I can do from where I am, and I'm very proud of my practice. I've built, I said I've built things. I've built a law practice that's been very successful. I built this sort of triage program with the Homeless Children's Education Fund. I built mental health court. I built a family. This is what I do. And so it's nice to talk about changing the criminal justice system, which is where we need the most change in our courts. But it's nice. Everybody can talk about it, but not everybody can do it. And I'm proud to say I'm the type of person that can do it. And I've looked from where I am, as a criminal defense attorney, and I realized some of the changes that would be made. And I think a lot of people realize some of the changes that need to be made. But I'm the right person to help make those changes, and that's the legacy I want to leave. I'm not just trying to take my next government paycheck. Again, I'm happy with where I am in my practice. I'm not looking to get a job where I don't have to work that hard. I'm a hardworking person, and I want to leave that legacy. I want to leave the legacy of improving our justice system, so that number one, we can help other people, and that everybody's treated fairly and equally. So that's the reason I want to make this jump and make this next move in my career.
Yeah, no, understood. And you talk about a lot of the reforms needed. A lot of people, when they think of the courts, right, they think about sort of an ivory tower, a lot of red tape, a lot of, unhelpful or helpful, depending on how you look at it, bureaucracy, right? Um, Once you get in office, assuming that things go the way that you want them to go the next few weeks, um, how do you envision, you know, um, just making sure that transparency is a priority in the office, to the extent that you can.
Right. So let's say that, first of all, the first thing that speaking of transparency, the first step in that is the individual judge in their courtroom. right? The courtrooms are to some extent, they're little fiefdoms, right? Which is one of the reasons I like treatment courts, because then everybody gets the same opportunity, right? It's not dependent on which of the 13 criminal court judges you're in front of, okay? But putting aside those treatment programs, and I'll talk some as we go forward a little bit about how I'd like to change those programs and maybe even make more. But ultimately, the first thing you have to do, if you get in there, is you're not going to be the president judge. You're not going to be in charge of the judges. You're just going to have your own little fiefdom there, right? And so to be transparent, you have to be willing. These are public records to make the information about the decisions you make, available in public if anybody asks for it. So, regardless of who's in front of you, regardless of, race, gender, gender identity, age, etc., you should be willing to put your statistics out there to say, hey, am I treating people equally, regardless of their interests, how they look, where they live, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I'm going to move a little away from your question. The other thing I want to talk about is, how statistics, what, I forget the phrase, but ultimately, one of the lies in the world is statistics, right? So, there's been a lot of talk about bias in the criminal justice system over the last 4 years, which is great. Okay. And honestly, the courts have released statistics that ultimately say, hey, we're not really treating, I'll just take, people based upon race differently. The numbers are pretty much the same. Whatever you think of that, right? That doesn't tell the whole story. And let me explain a little bit. So if you just sit up there and you just let people come before them and you treat them equally, that's great. And that's what, a judge should do. However, the question I think a judge needs to ask, and this is where I see bias. I've been in the courts a long time. Various individuals may have their issues, but for the most part, I think most judges do try to do what I just said, right? But here's where the issue comes in, right? The judge should ask themselves, if this person lived in a different community, looked different, identified differently, etc., would that person even be in front of me? Okay. And I think that's where we ultimately have to look for bias in our system. Okay. And let me expound upon that if I can for a second, Ross.
Yeah,
So in certain wealthy communities, okay, if somebody gets arrested, let's just take a drug possession issue. Okay. What happens is the police take them to their parents. If they're young enough, the school gets involved, they're sent to treatment, etc. And many of those things happen without the person ever even being charged with a crime. Okay. So that person never becomes a statistic in the criminal justice system. Okay. That does not, I think we know, happen in every community. Right. So we have to find a way to make sure, number one, that the resources are available. So, and I think it's great that these people get treatment without having to go to court or be charged with a crime. But everybody should have an equal opportunity to do that. Okay. And so, there's a lot of things that can be done on that. A lot of them are outside of a judge's power, to tell you the truth. But because of that disparity, I think a judge has to ask that second question. Not only am I treating everybody who comes in front of me equally, regardless of their situation, but would they even be in front of me? And that has to factor into a judge's decision.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And I think when it comes to equity, right? It's really just a mindset thing, So I think, as you mentioned, not even, talking about the specifics of, you know, the case, yeah, like questioning whether or not someone would even be there in the first place. They didn't look like, you know, what they looked like. You know what I mean? So, I think that is sort of like the question that everyone needs to be asking. This person's in front of me, but like, should they be?
Mhm.
Um, how do you sort of envision using your position to, you know, address some of the equity issues in the region? And obviously, I know you have to be careful, like courts of the position where like it's not an activist position, you know what I mean? You have to be really careful about, just what the goal of it is. But given what you just said, and acknowledging the issues that do exist, how do you see this position, furthering equity for Pittsburgh?
So let me, and I think you've hit upon it, Ross, is that a judge alone can't do the things that we want to do, right? But a judge can be part of a team, as I've done before, to implement programs that can lessen that issue, right? There's things outside of what a judge can do. It has to do with, all the things that cause, for instance, a black man to be more likely in the system than percentage wise than a white person, right? So that's one of the things that we need to deal with on a community and social level, right? And by social level, I mean like making sure that we're not over policing certain communities and so forth, right? And so, what can we do as a judge? And I think you need the district attorney to help with this, and you'd need at least the county executive and maybe either city council or county council, to help with these things. But I think what a judge can do is lead a team that says, let's move. I talked about, hey, if somebody comes into the system, do they have the opportunity to get treatment without being charged, right? So why don't we move up our treatment courts? We have many treatment courts. We have, and let me just say, the treatment courts are very effective for what they do, but they catch people after they're in the system for a while, which has its own set of problems. So we have mental health court, we have veterans court, we have drug court, we have a prostitution court, we have all these courts, right? And all these courts, by the time you get to them, you've been through being arrested and charged. Okay, you've been through a preliminary hearing, you've been through a formal arraignment, okay, and then maybe you're diverted, you have a pretrial conference, etc. Right? By this point, okay, you have probably, if you have a job that you needed to keep you, there's a good chance you've lost your job. Okay. Two, if you're in school, you may no longer be in school, right? Three, okay, in order to get to the treatment phase of what we want to do, you probably have to have a conviction. Okay. Now, I don't think I need to tell anybody the power of a conviction on somebody, right? I mean, it's devastating. I mean, it just derails somebody's life. Okay. And so what we're doing is we're saying we want to help people. So we have all these courts and we have all these treatments, but then we help somebody get better. And what do? We send them out in the world with a conviction. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? So I think what we need to do is we need to move a lot of those resources that are already there. Probation. I mean, probation has resources, right? These treatment courts have resources. Let's move all that to the front of the criminal justice system so that we can look before they have to go through all of that and when they most need the help immediately and say, let's give people that same opportunity that a wealthy person in the wealth community has to everybody so that they can get treatment, get better, and move on without a conviction. And so I think that's the best way to, from a court perspective, not a societal perspective, but from a court perspective, to help, to help equalize the situation somewhat, right? And so, as we do that, we have to be mindful again of whether people are fairly in the system, but at least we're looking at all of that equally at the front door because we really have an opportunity with our courts because we do have a lot of struggles with mental health issues and so forth. We have an opportunity there to help find people who need help and look at it as that, the courts as that at the first step. I mean, look, there's some violent crimes and so forth that probably don't belong in that, but that's by far the minority of what we have. Let's look at this as a chance to help people, not hurt them.
No, no, for sure, for sure. What I guess do you think are some of the barriers to implementing what you just described? some of the
Oh,
opposition to
well, the reason I say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there. Um, the barriers to achieving what I want to achieve, okay, are one, you need really a coalition, as I mentioned, okay? And so you need, that's a major shift in how we do things to move those courts forward, right? And to even create more courts if we can, right? It's a major shift in thinking. I will say though, but thanks to groups like yours and others, I think that discussion's there, and there's far more of a will to do that than there has been in the last 10 years. And so I think people are coming around to this way of thinking. So I think there's some motivation to do that, right? So number one is you have to have that shift in thinking, and you have to have that shift in resources. The second thing is you need more resources, because the percentage of people treated in these courts is a very small percentage of the people who just need help in the criminal justice system.
it.
So that's where we're going to need, funding from the state, from the federal government, from all of those things. So that's a barrier. Okay. And honestly, a judge can't go out lobbying for those funds, right? So you
Right.
need somebody else as part of that team to do that. Whether that be the county executive or the DA or whatnot. You also need the district attorney to be on board, right? Because the district attorney decides who to charge, who to prosecute, how to prosecute, if they'll divert cases versus having a conviction, that type of thing, right? So you need that as well. And then, finally, I would say that you need the police on board, okay? Because the police are the ones choosing to arrest people and deciding where to take them and so forth. And I will say that I think there's some interest, definitely within policing, to approach things that way as well. But that's another hurdle that has to be overcome.
Yeah. So one more follow up on that before we go on to the next question. So like having the police on board, and when it comes to programs that are meant to sort of like lower arrest rates, ultimately things like that, a lot of departments, and not necessarily talking about the city here, are kind of dependent on how many arrests they make,
Mhm.
right? How do you decouple that incentive, um, from the system?
So that's again beyond the power of a judge, right? But
Yeah.
what I would say is the first step to get this going is that you have to keep that incentive equivalent to giving somebody the opportunity for treatment as it is for the arrest, right? I think that's the easier way to do it. Rather than say, police, we're going to take away this source of income, right? I think what you say is, listen, regardless of whether you say to the community, let's help this person, or whether you arrest them, you're still going to do financially fine here, right? And your community is going to do fine too, right? So what we're ultimately going to do is say, listen, you are going to show up and you're going to be one of the people who is going to try to help this person get better, right? So you're going to come to whatever um, you know meeting place we have to discuss treatment and improvement and offer resources. You're going to be part of that, and I think that's important. I think if you can get police not only bringing people there but being part of the process, I think it's going to be much more successful because that's somebody else to help watch and help them along the way.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense. So
Yeah.
thank you for allowing me to push you a little bit on that.
Yeah, as you
Um,
can tell, I think a lot about these things. So.
no, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so going back to sort of like the broad overarching questions, um, can you give us an example of like a tough decision that you've had to make in your law career, or I guess like a tough, um, you know, case that you've had to go into, and how did you handle that, that tough situation or that tough case?
I would say my toughest cases come about when my clients don't want to listen to me, right? Um, you know, it's hard to trust somebody you don't know, right? Even it's easier when they pay you, you know. At the same time, it's difficult sometimes to overcome that barrier. Um, and it's particularly difficult when somebody's in a mental health struggle. As I mentioned, I do a lot of work with people in that situation. And typically when I enter the process, that person has no interest in me, thinks I'm out, against them often. I get sworn at, spit on, I've been punched in the face, I've been kicked. And that is difficult. And it's difficult not to want to respond, but you understand what the person's going through, and you ultimately are there to help them, right? And so it's difficult because they need to do X, Y, and Z to get better and to get through the system without too much damage to them. But they are not in a state of mind in order to do that. I'll give you an example. I had a guy um, who was in on relatively minor charges. He had um, he had misdemeanor charges for the most part. Certainly, something with his record that ultimately should not have resulted in incarceration. But he kept, while he was in the jail because of his mental health struggles, he kept writing notes. Asking for, sexual favors from various people and so forth. So they put him in jail and they kept him there. And so we had to fight very hard to convince him to get his medication, to start the process of getting better, and to stop doing those type of things. Ultimately, and this is just one example of the many. I mean, I can't tell you how much percentage of my practice is taken up by helping people in these situations, and how zero of my income comes from it, right? But ultimately, with this gentleman, I was able to, and over time, convince him the right medications come in. There's a trust that's built there, and ultimately, you make that decision. I'm going to stick this through, and you watch them get better, and it's transformative and exciting to see. And that happened with that gentleman um, who's now doing. We're actually able to do some work with him outside of mental health court, so we were able to get him services and a service plan at a level where we could still get the charges dismissed. And he's living an extremely productive life, and he's an example of what I'd like to see everybody have the opportunity to do. So that he has a terrific job now that he would not be able to get if he had one of those convictions. So
Yeah.
yeah.
How do you think, handling those tough decisions, those tough cases, how do you think that handles you, to be, on the county judiciary?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that doing that intimate work with people, it really gives you an opportunity to, number one, say a judge needs to be patient, right? People are going to fail many times before they succeed, right? And so a judge needs to understand that and not fly off the handle because somebody didn't follow their order, right? The courtroom is not about the judge. The courtroom is about the people before the judge. And
Mhm.
so, the judge should put their ego aside and realize what they're there to accomplish, right? And those are a few things. It's to get the best result for all of the people in front of them that they can find, and um, to make an atmosphere where people feel like they're heard, to have an atmosphere where they feel like they are comfortable saying what they have to say, right? Um, a courtroom, there's nothing I hate more than going to a courtroom where the judge ratchets up the tension, right? You go into some courtrooms and the judge is just making things more intense, right? It's already intense. Nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants that to be in the situation they're in, and a judge should be there to lower the temperature rather than raise it. And so, working with people, like I discussed with those mental health struggles, and all throughout my career with families and the impact they have, I think that puts me in a situation to understand everybody in front of me better. and to understand what the needs are of those people and to make sure that everybody walks out of there, whether they like the decision or not, feeling like they were heard and what they had to say was considered.
Yeah. Yeah. So next question, you sort of touched on this beforehand, talking about arrest rates and various, um, various things, and just about thinking about like the social factors that got someone in front of you in the first place. Um, what, how do you view the relationship between the county judiciary, and Black communities? What is that relationship, and what do you see as the impact, of the judiciary on Black communities?
Well, I think ultimately the impact of the judiciary on Black communities is ultimately what decisions the judge makes. Right? Look, there's been a lot of talk in the past few years about people being in jail on probation detainers. Right? There's been a lot of talk about bail. Right? And all of those things impact the Black community tremendously, right? Incarceration rates, right? The judge is the one putting people in jail, right? Um, again, look, I mean, if we have people picked up on technical violations and they're in jail for 2 days, they might lose their job, right? That, as you can tell, that's big for me. And then their family might lose their support system, right? And so the impact, as I can see with the Black community, is the more people you put in jail, the more you hurt their families, their children, and their communities. And so I think the issue is, and again, I don't really see necessarily where judges are intentionally putting, Black people in jail at a higher rate. I think the problem is that as people come in to the criminal justice system, there's a certain process that makes that happen, right? And I think the judge I'm running for won't deal with cash bail, right? That's more at the district judge level. But those cash bails can have a disparate impact upon individuals, and there may be more technical violations for people in certain situations for probation, right? And so when we look at all of those things, we again have to say less than, am I treating everybody equally? Everybody who couldn't make this bail isn't out, or are we just saying to ourselves, hey, we're just following the system, or are we saying to ourselves, hey, how do we make sure we're not disproportionately impacting people based upon these decisions, even applying the same factors to them, everybody the same? Are we being unfair in doing that? And are there more Black people, percentage wise, who are arrested in the system than anybody else? So I think ultimately, I think it's the judiciary in general as a system impacts that, and we have to look at those systems, which is being done. But you need the right people to continue doing that and improve upon it to make sure that that's not occurring from the judicial perspective.
Yeah. I'm gonna come back and ask you more about those systems in a second for sure. Um, Before we do that, though, I guess just like as a pretext, what what is justice to you? And what does equal justice mean to you, right? Um, and what steps will you take, to make sure that decisions that are made in the courtroom, are just and they are fair. So I know that was kind of like three questions at once, but starting off, just like what is justice, and what does equal justice look like to you?
So let me say that there's justice as a shining light, okay, and there's justice as a process, right? Shining light is that everybody in the world is treated fairly, that the result is always correct, and that the truth always comes out, right? And unfortunately, us mere humans can't achieve that, right? We can't do that. So the question becomes, what are we really dealing with? We're dealing with justice as a process, right? And equal justice to me is making sure that everybody is being treated the same in the system and as they enter the system. Okay. And you can see that's a big thing for me, right? And so if they're going to enter the system, then people should enter the system for the same reasons all across the board, right? And so, if somebody somewhere else is given an opportunity to go through treatment again, to do all of those things without entering the system, then everybody everywhere, or no matter who they are, again, what they look like, their gender identity, whatever it is, no, everybody everywhere should have that same opportunity if they're similarly situated, right? To me, that's what equal justice is, right? And so that is a very tall order, right? I mean, that is a big, 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 big issue. And the question is, how do we get there, right? And so, again, it's hard for a judge, and I hate to keep talking about this from the judicial perspective, right? It's hard for a judge to correct a lot of those things that cause that inequity in the entry into the system, right? But again, to me, equal justice is at least trying to our best provide those opportunities once you hit the front door of the criminal justice system, right? So again, if we can look at everybody as they come in and triage them based upon their needs, right? Now again, I don't want to. There are certain folks that, at least at a young age, that have proven that they need to be in jail for a little while, right? There's some people that need to be in jail, right? If you rape somebody, if you murder somebody, but that's a very small percentage of the people, right? And so, short of those people, the majority of the people coming in have underlying needs that need to be addressed, and they can be addressed in a safe way without, necessarily having convictions and without ruining their lives, right? And so, let's find a way to give everybody that opportunity. And to me, if we can do that, then we have equal justice.
Yeah. And so at the county level, I guess what are the barriers, that are in place of equal justice, right? What is sort of making the road, that much longer, at least at the county level.
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is simple. I think you hit upon it, right? You have, I mean, there are, I think it's 130 municipalities in Allegheny County. Okay. Now, they all don't have their separate, community norms and police departments, but there are a lot of different police departments, lot of different levels of policing, right? And the biggest barrier to me is that every department is run differently. Okay. And so there's no consistent approach throughout the county on who to arrest, what to do when somebody's committed a crime, what to do on what types of crime. So when you have that wide of a disparity, and completely, um, that complete lack of unity of purpose and determination and what to do. And I'm not saying any individual person in that is wrong necessarily, but what I am saying is that it's inconsistent. And because it's inconsistent, you get an inconsistent result with who shows up in the criminal justice system. Okay. And so when we look at that, if you're going to ask me what our biggest barrier is, it's um, that fracturing in the ultimate approach of law enforcement throughout the county.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess like when you talk about that fracturing, a large part of that, like as you mentioned, is just the fact that we have so many municipalities, right? What are sort of the solutions to make that part of the justice system more uniform?
Uh, you've got me there, Rob. That's a tough one, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's a community issue that's very difficult to deal with. And again, I'm going to go back to the same answer I had with before is if I can't control that element of it, what I'd like the courts to do is take a look at it the front door of the criminal justice system and say, hey, you know, who is here, who isn't here, and what can we do to try to equalize this at the front door?
yeah,
But maybe ask the county executive candidates that other question because I'm not sure
fair
what
enough.
to do, Ross.
That's
Yeah.
fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Um, so this next question, I'm gonna ask it in two parts because I don't want to presume. A, would you agree that there is a housing crisis right now facing, Allegheny County? And B, um, whether or not you agree, I guess like, do you see any role in the judiciary, for ensuring that residents are, having their rights protected in such a crisis? And obviously, like this is a question that like directly like may not impact the code of common pleas, but I think a lot of folks, care about this. So, um, yeah, let me know if you need me to repeat the question.
Oh, no, I mean, there's clearly a housing crisis. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, again, the Homeless Children's Education Fund and and some of my pro bono work has given me a window into those situations. And I've gone to these homes. I deal with people who are homeless, as I've discussed, right? And so I clearly understand that we have those problems. I've seen, I've tried to help, but it's a little bit outside of my area of law. People who, I'll give you an example, who they have an apartment, and it's truly unfit for habitation, right? But the problem is, if they complain, the landlord just gets rid of them, and they get somebody else in there, right? Like, so not only is it a crisis in homelessness, but it's a crisis in, clean, safe, affordable circumstances, right? And so let's just focus on that little area about what do we do, with somebody who is forced to live in a place that is basically unsafe and unhealthy, right? Well, the first place that would, and it's part of the judiciary, but we're talking about the district judges, right? Because any of those claims initially go to them. And, there has to be a way to say, look, they're evicting for me or ending my lease because I'm complaining because there's mold in my apartment, right? And so that has to be something that that a district judge considers. And then ultimately, there's a housing court in the Court of Common Pleas, and we have to make sure that in the Court of Common Pleas and the district judge level, that resources are provided to make sure people who are either being evicted or living in an unsafe situation can be, provided with safe and affordable housing. And then I hate to throw it back on it, then it's a larger community issue to make sure that type of housing is available. So I hope
Yeah,
that answers your question.
no, it does for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And I appreciate the lack of ambiguity on the housing crisis. I just had to start out that way. Um,
Yeah.
but we are 100% in a housing crisis. There's zero doubt
Oh,
about
there's no doubt about it.
that.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, yeah. So as we kind of land this plane here, I want to move away a little bit from, you know, the judicial, aspect of it. Um, how would you define your role as a community member, for however long that you've considered yourself, a member of the community?
I think there's two lenses for for how I look at myself in the community, right? The first one is as a professional, right? I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer who's very proud to say that I help people, right? And so, most of my volunteer work and so forth comes through providing legal services or advice. And I think it's very important to have those resources there, um, again, to help people who need that help and can't afford it. Right. So my first thing is I'm part of my community because I believe everybody has a duty to contribute to their community and to improve it, and not just take from it. And so I do that by helping people with my legal skills. And so that's number two, number one. The second lens I see it through is as a family man, married with three children, and being part of our schools, and coaching my kids' sporting teams, and competing, and one of my kids is in musicals, and all of those things. And so my personal life is largely developed around my family and some friends, and I see myself as a father and a husband, and somebody that people in the community can respect, and that they can seek help from, and know that they have a friend who's willing to help them or their children in any situation. So that's how I see myself as a member of the community.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess like how does filling each of those roles in the way that you do, how do you bring that into, your life as a legal professional?
I have three crazy children, Ross. And one thing it has taught me is patience, right? And if a judge isn't patient, they should hang it up their robe immediately, right? In fact, I'll tell you a story. I have a lot of teachers in my extended family, right? And at one point, I thought maybe I'll be a teacher, and they looked at me as a young man. I was probably 19 or 20, and they said, "Anthony, you are not patient enough to be a teacher," right? And so I think through my career and through my family, and I know this through my career, particularly through my family, through individuals with mental health struggles, I have learned the patience necessary to serve in that role. And being a judge is one of the top three things I'd say is being patient, and giving an opportunity. People aren't there because they have everything buttoned up all the time, right? They're there because they're struggling, and because they need some help, and you have to have the patience to give them the opportunity to succeed and move on with their lives.
Yeah, 100%, one hundred
Yeah.
percent. Um, Last but not least, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing Allegheny County right now? And how does that impact how you operate, as a lawyer, as a potential judge, as a professional?
It's hard to it's hard to place that into one bucket, right? But what I would say is the bucket that we have is social services, right? And again, the lens I see this most through is mental health, right? We have a tremendous number of people with untreated, uncounseled mental health struggles, right? And so that affects, and I'm going to have to give you two here, but that affects homelessness, that affects crime, that affects community relations, all of those things. It affects the horrible crisis we have in mass shootings in our country, and even Allegheny County, where we've seen that, right? So we see that. We see addiction, which is often tied to mental health problems, right? So as a bucket, those social services um, that we need, we don't have enough of. We have great professionals in those areas to help. We simply don't have enough. So the first thing I would say is that we need to find a way to provide housing and social services to the vast number of people in our communities, and it seems to be growing, that need it. All right, that's number one. Number two is, we've been at this for a long time. We need to find a way to make sure that everybody is in a comfortable, sustainable economic situation, right? And if we can do those two things, which, Ross, if you can do it, that's great. But if we can do those two things, I think a lot of the other problems we have will diminish tremendously.
Yeah.
So,
No, thank you. Thank you.
mhm.
So that was our last, of our, written questions. I guess my last question to you is just what's your message to people who might, look at this race and say it doesn't matter who the judge is, it's going to be the same, outcome regardless, right? That this is a race that, for common people doesn't matter. Like what's sort of your response to, folks who might have that attitude?
So let me say this. You need a lot of different people to improve the situations we talked about, right? In a lot of different positions. But I believe that somebody in my position can tackle a piece of that, right? And if you put enough pieces together, you'll see real improvement. And so when you say, I'm looking at this person, and because of that, he's not going to do anything different than anybody else. Well, let me say this. First of all, let me just say that, it's not because look at the person and say, what have they done in their career? And will they do what they're saying they're doing, or at least work hard to try to do what they're saying they want to do, right? I'm not, there's no job, whether it be public defender or former county solicitor, which my opponents were, that's some gold standard for, oh, well, this person will make it better. What you need is somebody who has shown the will, the desire, and the ability to accomplish the things we're talking about, right? And so why will it be different? It'll be different because that's what I do as I get things done. Again, I've built a successful law practice. I've built a successful family. I've built mental health court. I've built, a program with the homeless children's education. I can go on and on and on and on. And the other thing you can look at is this guy doing this just to get the next paycheck? I'm not. I have a successful private practice. So why do I want to do this? The only reason I want to do this is because I want to accomplish the things I'm talking about. So I beg you to give me that opportunity and show to you that I can make a difference.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is Anthony DeLuca, everyone. Do you have anything else that you want to say to folks before we close out?
Yeah, I just want to say again, I'd love to have your vote. Again, the election's May 16th. Ross, I just want to thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on your program and to have an opportunity to speak to your organization, which is terrific. And I want everybody to have a great night. And again, if I can answer any questions, my website's DeLuca for Judge. That's the number 4, DeLucaforJudge.com. You can reach me through there, and I'd love to discuss anything you have, or if you have ideas, I'd like to listen to them. And again, I appreciate your opportunity here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this edition of the Power Hour. I'm Ross Tedder. We're logging off, but I will see you next week at the same time.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
Over the course of a few years, life yielded a crisis of pandemics, resulting in many reeling and searching for answers. Black men especially have had to grieve the passing of hip-hop icons DMX, Michael K. Williams, Biz Markie, and many others. How has this impacted Black men? How has this altered the way they see themselves, their ability to express themselves, and their mental health? We sit down with Black men raised on the culture of hip-hop and ask them directly, let's have a bite, take a step back in order to move forward. I'm your host, Miracle Jones, and this is Brunch with the Black Man.